My name is Ashlyn, and I work with the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal. And today we're interviewing Paul Spears and Janelle Eigen from the Torrey Honors College program at Biola University. I'll let them both I will let them both introduce themselves, and then we'll get going with some questions.
Well, hi, I'm Paul Spears. I'm the director of the Honors College here at Biola University. I've been doing this, I've been actually teaching in the Honors College for 25 years now, and I've been the director for 12.
And hi, I'm Janelle Eigen. I am the Associate Director of the Torrey Honors College. I've been teaching here for 14 years now, but I was also actually an alum of the program. So I've been here all in all for about 20 years. I've been around for about 20 years and have been the Associate Director for 3.
Thank you. So we'll just dive right into some questions. If you want to just give like a general overview of Biola University and the Torrey Honors College program, perhaps some history about when the program began.
Sure. I can start. So Torrey was established in 1996. And the founder was John Mark Reynolds, who was a philosopher and what would you say, an entrepreneur at heart. He saw a real need for change in undergraduate education in terms of moving away from the sort of cafeteria style way that liberal arts education was being taught in the core. I would guess though they didn't even call it the core then, right? They just called it your liberal arts or your gen ed education. And he thought there's got to be a better way to do this. He was deeply committed to great books. And he thought what we can do is actually reorganize an academic life around discussion, classic texts, and writing. And so he built this brand new program, was able to convince university administration because he's got those kind of skills to do this. And off it went. And it started with 36 students. And has grown to, well, now we're close to 400 students in our program. So it has been, it's been good growth over the years, good work. We love working with the students, and it has been something that people are attracted to with some continuous regularity, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and so the way that it works is we have students from every major across the university, and so you don't have to, Torrey is not a major. What it does is it replaces both your gen ed, and every Biola student takes 30 units of Bible. And so we also cover those 30 units of Bible and theology. So students come in as freshmen and they get connected to a cohort of peers. There's about sort of 15 students in a cohort, and that cohort stays mainly stable for 4 years. They also get connected to a single faculty member who's their mentor for that entire 4-year journey that they do through the program. And that person does oral exams with them, grades their papers, does all of that work for them. And so they're doing that as a kind of a complement to whatever other work they're doing at the university as their gen ed core.
Yeah, and what's pretty distinctive about our mentoring is most students, when they get assigned a faculty mentor, they think of them as like a super advisor or something like this. And that's not the case at all. With our students, they get assigned, a faculty member with a PhD, and most students don't work with someone with a PhD, usually till grad school. But our students get one the first day here in the program, and they really are about it's sort of an amalgam between, I would say, academic discipleship, maybe apprenticeship, maybe even a little bit of academic coaching. You kind of smush those together, and you get mentoring, and so it's pretty distinctive. And our students build a pretty close bond with their mentors because it is sort of a multifaceted life experience that they're having. It's not merely delivery of information and then sort of regurgitation. No, it's life together. It's thinking hard. It's having justified reasons for the things that you say are true, right? It's pushing you beyond merely just performative academic life.
Yeah, and it's also helping students navigate the sort of the transition into adulthood too.
Yes.
So you start off with like, oh, how's my paper? Like, what should I do for my paper topic? And then by the time you're juniors, it's kind of like, broke up with me, right? You just sort of you get to serve as a mentor. You get to serve as a kind of an intermediary adult helping these young people transition from their sort of life as children to this more adult way of experiencing the world. And you get a really sweet opportunity to speak into their life during that time, and be part of them kind of navigating what it means to turn into an adult and a Christian adult.
Yeah, and it is sort of encouraging them to leave the nest and that it's going to be okay during this time. And they know that one of the great things about this is that you could think of mentoring in one way, which is sort of like very scrutinizing, looking over your shoulder, waiting for you to make a mistake. This is more like, no, we're actually here for your success. I tell students all the time that when you get into Torrey, what you have is somebody who wants to support you, who's not looking to wash you out, but is actually looking to equip you to be successful.
Yeah,
and that's a radically different experience that they've had before, right? Usually they're just worried about performing well and not learning how to think, but doing what you're told to do. And we're like, no, let's open this up. Let's actually own our own education and move forward so that we could see why these things that we're pursuing are good.
Yeah, I describe it as a kind of a personal trainer model, right? So where I can see what you're strong about already, and that's great. And then I can see your weaknesses, and I'm not seeing them to try to sort of stab a hole in them. I'm seeing them to say like, okay, let's work on upper body this week. Like there's need there. And then
that's exactly right.
Kind of a nice, well-rounded education, because you get that kind of personal knowledge of what you in particular need.
Yeah, and because they're with them 4 years, you, like Janelle was pointing out, you really get to know them. Mm-hmm. And in one sense, what's great about that is that you can tell they care for you. The other thing that's great is that you can't hide your weaknesses for very long.
Yeah.
Right. And so those actually emerge. But the good news is, again, what we want is to help you when you're in the midst of those. So that's the real good thing. And the students start to see that as an advantage.
Yeah.
That sounds like a really excuse me, that sounds like a really interesting program design. So am I understanding correctly that it's like an optional replacement to your gen ed? So some students at Biola University have like more of a run-of-the-mill gen ed experience, and others opt into this honors program.
Right. Yeah. So to get into the honors program, you have to apply and you have to be accepted into the program. So you've got to have, for lack of a better way of saying it, skin in the game, right? You've got to take the time to fill out the application, to do the interview, to actually talk about yourself, explain why you think this might be advantageous to you. It's not merely honors for honor's sake, right? Some students are like, well, I'm an honor student, I should just do honors. And we're like, well, there's more to it than that. And I often will describe it as what we really are about is a relentless pursuit of the truth, right? And that if you want to be a part of that, if you want to engage in a community that is committed to those kind of things, then this is the place for you. If you think, no, I just kind of want to jump through the honors hoops, then this may not be the place for you.
Yeah. And just for information's sake, it's sort of 10 to 15% of the population is in Torrey. Yeah.
Okay. That's really interesting. And then you said that you get into a cohort of around 15 people. Is it, so just for clarity's sake, are you like going to a regular class and then you meet with your cohort outside of that? Or is your cohort where the bulk of your study is done?
Yeah, so the cohort will meet in freshman and sophomore year. You meet twice a week for a 3-hour-long discussion, and that's your class. And then you're meeting with your mentor outside of that, kind of in an Oxford-style tutorial sort of situation. But yeah, the primary thing that happens is you're with your cohort for 6 hours a week, and each time you come into class, you know which book you're going to be discussing, and everyone has read that book and done careful notes on it before class. And then you come in and one of the faculty comes in, but you actually don't know who, you don't know which of the faculty members, and there are about sort of 15, 16 faculty members. You never know which of them is going to show up for any individual class. So they show up, they sit down, and they launch an opening question. And that opening question is a question that's intended to get to the heart of what that great book is talking about. And then, I mean, ideally, the sort of the best possible Torrey session is a session which that's all the mentor does, or the tutor does. They come in, they launch the question, and the group takes it and goes forward. Now, obviously, that's a kind of like a success that you don't get to right away. It takes time to build up the skills that the cohort has interacting with each other, reading the text well, and the tutor is there as a helper in that process, giving follow-up questions, clarifying, helping the students to kind of see the way that their comments are connecting to each other, things like that. But by the time our students are juniors or seniors, for one, they actually take over the job of leading the discussion themselves. So they'll sign up to be the leader of a session, and they'll come in with the opening question and lead the discussion. And even when it isn't a student-led session, by and large, at that point, they kind of know what they're doing. And so the tutor can come in and they'll still launch the question, but the responsibility for having the discussion really rests on the cohort at that point. And the faculty member is there just kind of doing nudges or even just contributing as a fellow sort of learner in the conversation more than as a teacher. There's no lecturing in session. We only ask questions or sort of do work to help the group see how to follow the question that we've begun with.
Yeah, our interventionist acts are small and strategic. Maybe that's the way to think of it. The other piece to this that's really distinctive is that we really think of the intellectual life is as integrative, and so we actually model that in the way in which we teach. So Janelle is her PhD's in philosophy, French philosophy. Mine's in philosophy, education, history of ideas. But we've got theologians, we've got biblical scholars, we've got historians, and we all teach across the curriculum. So one day I may be teaching Plato's Republic, but then the next day I may be teaching T.S. Eliot. And we're all engaged in this because we like to say that we're not just master teachers. We're good at our disciplines, but we're master learners. So we've learned how to navigate these texts together. And so maybe you can even think like in a class, all I'm doing is holding the tiller, right? And the students are doing the bulk of the work because that's the way it should be. I might do something corrective, but mostly they need to be engaging this. And early on, they're learning how to do that, and they don't quite know what that looks like. But like Janelle said, as they move forward into upper division classes, they start to really get a sense of ownership and mastery of this, and they realize that being wrong about something in class is actually advantageous because it moves the conversation forward. So you don't have to think of it as failing, but as a moment of possibility. Maybe that would be the best way of saying that.
Yeah. One of the big things that we emphasize both on the mentoring side and in session is that it's not a performance, right? Like so many discussion classes are, everybody's looking at the teacher the whole time and always trying to sort of see like, did I score points? Did I say the right thing? Am I the cool one? And so we spend a lot of time in the first couple of semesters saying like, stop asking that question. Stop asking me what your grade is. That's not what matters here. Are you guys making progress towards understanding the answer to the opening question? And if the answer to that is yes, then whatever part you're playing in that, just play that part. Don't think about how it makes you look. Don't think about it as like an individual sport that you're playing here. You're playing a team sport. And like I said, the kind of the personal trainer mentality, if I'm spotting a weakness as your mentor, that's fine, because what that means is that we have a chance to strengthen you in that area. So you don't have to feel like your notes or your paper or things like that are performances either. What those are praxis. Those are kind of doing the thing over and over and over again. And every time you do it a little bit better. You start in the water flailing, and then wouldn't you know it, you flail a little bit more efficiently every time, and then suddenly you're swimming. And that's the kind of the goal of the program.
I guess one last piece to say to add to that, to give it a little more context, is all of our students have applied for the program. So they're all academically, they're very good, right? They're in the top 10%, usually top 8% maybe, in terms of like if we were doing SAT, ACT scores. And so they're really used to performing.
Yes.
And they're very, whether they'd say it or not, they are a certain kind of type A. And so they're always wanting to make sure they're doing something exactly right. And when we tell them to quit looking at the tutor, or we tell them to quit thinking of it in a performative way, they're not quite sure what to do with themselves. But when we say, no, you're actually here to learn. You're actually here to gain understanding, not just repeating something someone else says. And one thing, they'll never say that quite out loud, but they'll be like, but I know what it is to repeat things. And I know what it is I've mastered a certain set of skills, and you're telling me to do it differently. So part of that is just disabusing them of those notions, especially their freshman year. They're so nervous about that. And we're like, no, you did fine. Like, well, how fine? Like what, like A fine or like A minus fine? Right.
Oh, that's very relatable. Um, it sounds like a really interesting opportunity for them to kind of relearn how to learn. Like, not that repeating, things and getting A's on tests isn't like a method of learning, but just like a broadening their learning
Yeah.
ability.
Right. We're not saying don't do multiplication tables or memorize the periodical chart. We're not like
Right.
we're not against that. What we are against is like thinking that the only thing that's going on is real. Like you have to know exactly what's right and then repeat it in kind. That's not really learning. That's like allowing yourself to be what led in harness by someone for your
Right.
educational experiences.
So more of like teaching them how to think for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
So,
sometimes they don't want to do that. They're like, would you just tell me? And you're like,
right.
They literally will in class, like say, please tell us the answer.
They want the structure.
I've had people say that, like, and I'll say, well, what do you think it is? They're like, would you stop doing that?
Um, so I'm gonna skip around because now I'm curious about like what has the response been from your students? Because it sounds like it's almost a shock to their system when they first get started. And then by the end of it, they're like possibly even teaching you concepts.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I They love it. They absolutely love it. And we have this wonderful, like we get to live in this unicorn land of this beautiful culture that's been built up over time and that gets transmitted from one generation of students to another. So it's to the point now where if I had to kind of go in and create a culture of kids who were engaged and doing the work for its own sake, like I actually don't know if I would know how to do it anymore because I haven't had to do it for so long. It just happens sort of by being in this culture of people who are bought in and who are loving to do the work for its own sake, who are falling in love with these books and with these ways of thinking and these big ideas. They are beautiful works. And once you get the eyes to see them, and once you get the willingness to kind of submit yourself to them and to learn how to love them, they open up a way of thinking that's rich and deep and just beautiful. And so we get the huge privilege of being able to teach these kids who are so bought into the program, and for whom it really is life changing, genuinely, and consistently life changing. And I can speak to that as somebody who went through it as a student as well. But I also, that's a continual remark that we get from students as they're graduating, is the way that the program has changed their way of thinking about the world, about their own lives, about success going forward, about what it means to be a good friend, about what it means to live a virtuous life. There's so many things that they come out thinking differently about because of the books that they've read.
Yeah, and I think part of it is the students kind of know what they're getting into. We do our best to explain to them very clearly, and they get in the middle of it and they're like, okay, I didn't know this is kind of what it was all about. And they go home for Christmas and their parents are like, who did you send back to us? I don't mean that negatively, like they've been brainwashed. They're like, no, we're having like these really different conversations at the dinner table. And I remember at one graduation, I had a couple parents come up to me and they said, we were listening to the first talk that you ever gave to our student when they were a freshman. They're graduating now. And you said that we don't care about their vocational aspirations because that's not our primary good. And they said, we didn't like that at all. And I thought, oh, this conversation is not going to go well. And then they said, and we were wrong. Our son has changed so much, and we've seen how he's grown and become the kind of person who owns the commitments that he makes, who pursues the truth with excitement. And actually, what's really funny is I was thinking about this interview today, and I'm gonna have to admit, doing a little mindless Twitter scrolling, and I actually came upon posts by two of our graduates who are both have PhDs and are teaching at university level. And this one of them said, I remember in college, I was reading Aristotle's Ethics, and man, that thing changed my life. Everything was different. That and Boethius. And then followed up by another one of them who was a friend said, oh, for me, it was Nick Ethics and Augustine, but not Confessions. It was City of God. I don't know why. That was the thing that reoriented me to, you know, to what this project was really all about. And so both of them went on. Now, we're not saying you should go on and get PhDs and do philosophy, right, or academics. What we're just saying is like these are moments where they reflect, you know, and both of them 15 years or more graduates, right? They've been out for a long time. That's still a moment that they plant a flag in and say that's where change happened.
That's really cool. It, books always have an impact on you. I feel like if you're reading the right books,
Yeah.
but it's very interesting to think of like an entire program and an entire group of students that are just having their views changed like that, which like for the better, of course.
Yeah.
So I'm very curious about the reading list for your program. It's intense. I was looking at it. There's a
Yes.
lot of books. So could you please tell me about perhaps the creation of that list? Is it something that you update regularly, or is that like those are your top picks for students to read?
Yeah, it's so the list has been evolving for the last 25 years. And it's very different from where it began. Although there are lots of books that are always
Lots
have
of
always
core
been on
books,
it,
though, right?
will always be on it. The Republic is never not going to be on this list. But yes, we go back to the list regularly, and add things to it and redesign it. The first 2 years are a chronological run. So we start with the Iliad and we end somewhere sort of in the 1800s. And then what we do in the upper division is we go back, and every semester is organized around a question or a topic, and we kind of interrogate the whole tradition on that particular question. So there's the first semester is about kind of like justice, community, what it looks like to form a community that is just. And then the next semester is a kind of a science, cosmos, is this an organized universe kind of a question. And so those lists, so the first 2 years is in some ways a kind of an assertion about kind of the best of the best in some ways, right? We want to say like, okay, this is the run of things that in some ways you really need to get in order to get the things that we're getting to. And then those upper division curriculum, oftentimes it's not necessarily that this book is, the book that we would put above every other book if we were asking no question, but that on this human question that we think is important, this book is the right book to look to that can give us that answer. And so we get a little bit quirky in some of those upper division classes because of the way that those specific books help us answer particular questions we want to ask. Excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is, and she's also not talking about what goes on behind the scenes, which is our faculty, and it's really enjoyable because we are deeply committed to the text and we have fallen in love with them. And in one sense, when we get ready to move on, and someone will make a proposal, well, what if we move like Henry V, right? Or what if we, Henry IV, Part 1? That's me. And they did remove it, and I was like, why don't you like my family? Right. I mean, it is, you have this sort of deep, abiding care, but it's great, right? In other words, it's not a laissez-faire attitude. It's an attitude like, no, these things are really important. And the students also feel that vibe from the faculty, because the faculty in some sense are living a microcosm of that experience, and students watch it happen. They watch us get in conversations and fights about our views of Henry V, or what do we think is going on in Boethius, and they're like, oh, you guys are actually engaged at a deep level. It is not just performative or obligatory because it's your vocational aspirations. It's like, no, these ideas really matter. And they can tell that by the way in which we're committed to the text. And I think that whether we always say it overtly or not, it is in the water. And that's what's really fun about it. And our students start to see that. And the underclassmen see it from the upperclassmen. The upperclassmen don't leave jaded. They are like, they're the ones that are saying, no, really.
Yeah.
This is really true. Like, Ijan's not just making this up. She actually thinks it, and so do we, right? And so that's one of the wonderful things to see, that when the students are effectively pursuing the truth, the way in which it returns to them is so significant that they can't help but call others to it.
One other thing to say about our curriculum is that we, as much as possible, read whole books, and we're really committed to that. So, and we've just decided, because you can't excerpt and get the real thing when you're talking about a masterwork. And so we've just bit the bullet and said, yeah, we're going to make our students read a lot of pages, because we're so committed to them reading whole works and understanding the kind of the bits in the context of the whole. And that's a culture we've built over time, and that they continue to be willing to go there with us. But yeah, we read a lot of pages on purpose, because we want to make sure that we're actually engaging the masterwork as it is.
As the full argument.
Yeah, exactly. The full argument is nothing that annoys me more. I'm a big Dostoevsky person, and to think that you could read the Grand Inquisitor excerpted from the Brothers Karamazov and somehow think that you've understood what Dostoevsky's doing. I mean, that's just, it's that's the craziest section to take from the Brothers Karamazov, but B, just the whole idea that would be a way of engaging a masterwork, to us just doesn't make any sense at all. You need to see what's being done with that piece as it relates to the whole. So as much as
like
possible,
sitting and talking with somebody for 3 hours and thinking you know them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'll apologize real quick for background noise. There's some construction going on.
Okay.
So
I can't hear it from here.
I can't hear it. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's great. So I guess for our audience that may not know, we included the Torrey Honors College program in our Great Books report. And so the basis of your program is just including a lot of the great books that are mentioned in our report, as well as others. Do either of you have like a favorite book where, like, if you were talking to someone and said, I need to read a really important book, what would you suggest if you had to pick one?
Oof.
Yeah. So I will often joke when people ask me that it's like picking my favorite child, you know, and I mean, it's my daughter, but don't tell my son, right? Like, it's hard. So I would lead with the Bible and say, okay, if we can bracket that, I would say, and then I would probably cheat in 2, to be perfectly honest. So I've already taken 3, right? I've already bracketed the Bible. And then I would say that Nick McKeon Ethics for me, and then Augustine's Confessions, right? There's something amazing about being as brilliant as Augustine is, and yet reading his work, and it's like he knows me. And, you know, when he says things like, my heart is restless until it rests in you, and then I'm asking myself why I feel all, you know, sort of emotionally disheveled, and I'm like, oh, right, because what Augustine said over there, you know, over 1,000 years ago, it's like we're buddies, right? I mean, it really is the way in which it calls you to that. And then I love Aristotle because it calls you to really think about the things that you are pursuing on a regular basis, the intentionalities that you bring to the table. What does it mean to be good? How does it mean to pursue virtue? What are your friends like? Like, what kind of choices do you make there? So there's something that is both really conceptually complex and pragmatic simultaneously. And so I love both of those texts for those reasons.
Yeah. And I would say, I guess the first thing I would say is one of the things that we have discovered in the course of doing this program is that what's happening across the great books that we read is a huge conversation, right? And it's a conversation that starts with Homer, but as you go on in the sequence, the authors that you're reading later on have read all of the things that you've read before, and it's kind of this thing that builds over time, and you kind of get into an understanding of what it is to be a human, and how that affects the way that we act and the way that we think about what's good and what's worth pursuing.
Yep.
And so in some ways, to take a book from later in the curriculum and just plop that down and say, okay, I start here, would be to rob that book of a lot of its power, because one of the things that it needs in order for it to really do its thing is the conversation that comes before. So that's the cool thing that we get to do with our students.
So you're saying all of them? Are you doing that cheating thing?
No,
where you...
I'm not. No, I'm not. No, I have two, but I would say, like, you can't necessarily start. So the one I already mentioned is the Brothers Karamazov, and I'm absolutely adore the Brothers Karamazov. I think it is one of the masterworks of all time. I regularly make the bold claim to my students that it is just the best book, excluding the Bible. But what I would say about Dostoevsky is you can't just drop in and understand everything that he's doing, right? If you haven't deeply sat with the Gospel of John, you can't understand what's happening in the Brothers Karamazov well. And so the way that Dostoevsky is kind of leaning on this long tradition, if you haven't read Pascal, I don't think you can get at what Dostoevsky's doing. If you haven't read Shakespeare, if you haven't read Dickens, right? Because those are the guys that Dostoevsky is looking at and is engaging with in his novel. You're missing a lot of what you need to really get deeply what's going on there. The other one I've also mentioned, which is the Republic, and that's my sort of foundation stone, is just the way that the Republic conceives of this fundamental question of, like, but is being good, or is it just something we have to do? Right? Like, that's, to me, that's the question at the crux of every human life. And the kind of defense that he gives for the reason why it's good to be good. And even if nobody knows, even if you get no credit for it, even if you get none of the external benefits, it's still better to live a good life. Especially for our students who are at exactly the same stage in life as Glaucon and Adeimantus and are making that determination for themselves. To me, there's just no text that's more practical than the Republic for what they're wrestling with right at this moment.
And let me just say one thing. I don't know, Janelle, if you're like this, but I would assume you are. If I'm teaching a book,
I hate it. No,
if I'm teaching a book and I'm really into it, like right now, I'm thinking On Living God, Bernard of Clairvaux is just everywhere in me. And in one sense, I'm like, that's my favorite book right now. That thing is amazing, right? The notions of desire and the questions that you're asking about what it means to be a human and how God made us to desire him. And I'm like, oh, that. And so one of the cool things about the books that we're reading is that there are those moments when you immerse yourself into them and you realize how amazing they are. And and you have a little, like, emotional, like, I think you might right now be my favorite book, right? Right. And then you go on to the next one and it's going to be like, you're gonna be teaching something else. And you're like, now this is my favorite book, but it's because they return so well and they're so rich that, and you watch students fall in love with those books. So they've had lots of moments where they've fallen in love with books, but that's exactly how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I think that's a really interesting point you made, Janelle, about how, they always say math is cumulative, but reading is cumulative. Like, the more you read, the more you realize, oh, this was a reference and I didn't even realize it because I'd never read the reference. So that's really cool that your students are being set up to have like such a broad understanding of literature.
Yeah.
So I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I have two questions that I would like to end with. As instructors of this program, what do you feel like you have gained from this? Because, we think about setting students up for the world and how they can continue to further their learning, but I know that you and your colleagues are absolutely learning alongside of them. So, like, what is something that you feel like you've gained from this program?
Oh man, many ways.
Easy question, right?
Yeah, I wake up every day and kind of pinch myself that I get to do this as a job and people pay me for it. It's just too much fun.
Don't say that too loud.
Loud. Yeah. Well, what you were saying earlier about getting to that place where you're learning. I mean, I learn from the books every single time I go to session, even if I'm with a freshman group who's still trying to find their way. the book itself is rich enough, and they're smart and they're seeing it from a different perspective. And I will walk away from every session I teach with new insights about the material. But I think there's more to being steeped in a great books tradition over time than just the individual insights. It's a kind of it's a way of being oriented towards the world, that's quite countercultural, that you more and more live inside of, a different perspective about what is meaningful and what is good and what it means to live a good life. And the more oriented I am to this tradition, I think the more that enriches everything about my relationships, about the way that I parent, about the way that I engage with my students, the way that I engage in my church. There's the kind of the richness of the life that you get invited to, in these books, spills over into pretty much every element of your life, around you. And I mean, the way that we have these office hours conversations, so students will come in to office hours with us, and it's feels a little bit like being a pastor and a little bit like being a psychologist. But what you're also doing is you can draw on all of these books, right? So they come in and they have this question about, like, how do I deal with my parents? And you're like, well, remember Turgenev, or like, you have this incredibly rich tradition that you can draw on, to help, and to sort of speak insight into all of these really practical situations. And to me, being able to share the reading with our students gives me a place to speak wisdom into their life that's so much richer than anything else that I could possibly have given them just on the basis of what I think myself. That it's a huge advantage and just a huge gift to be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that nails it, Janelle. But I would just, and once I could stop right there. I think that's exactly right. But the other piece I would say is, like, for me, even just on an individual level, I've gotten another degree and didn't have to go back to college and pay for it. Right? By that I mean, so we're all discipline wonks. In other words, we all have the area that we are specialists in. And so mine was history of ideas and analytic philosophy. And I get into class and I have to go teach poetry. And I'm like, but there's no syllogism anywhere. I'm looking for an argument. And I'm like, I don't know if I can do this. And then they'll say something like, do you like your job? Well, no, I really like my job. And so, well, you better go read some poetry. Right. And so, mildly under duress, I find my, at first I was like, okay. And then I read T.S. Eliot and I was like, why did no one ever tell me of this? Right. And it brings, and I think what Janelle is getting at is a kind of intellectual plasticity too, that when things emerge, all of a sudden you're thinking about, instances, you're thinking about the ways in which, when a student's like, I can't concentrate, I literally go to T.S. Eliot and East Coker and Distracted by Distractions, right? And I'm like, well, I start thinking things like this. And so it gives me tools by which to talk about the human condition that these amazingly brilliant writers have helped me engage with. And then I'm not selfishly just hoarding them. It seems organic and right to then share those outside of us. And it makes me actually better when I'm talking with students about those moments. And so I think that the benefit is significant. And it's because it's a human benefit. It's not distinctly ours because we are all with PhDs and only those in a certain area with our kinds of training could do this. That's just the lie. The lie is like, no. The reality is that this stuff yields and returns in really significant ways. And I think that our lives have been evidence of that too.
All right, so I'll wrap us up with one final question. Is there anything that you'd like to say to prospective students, or maybe even parents and grandparents who might be watching?
Sure. I think the thing I would say is that there are moments in your life when something is new that you're not sure if you want to jump into the water and try it. I would say that our students that have done regular high school things like this, and the kind of work that we're doing now that we're even describing, if they're listening in, is going to seem somewhat foreign. But in the same way that if you travel to another city or another country and you get handed a plate of food that you've never tried before, right? You should take what we used to call in my family no thank you bites, right? And no thank you bites are you've got to try it. And sometimes when you try these things, you realize, oh my gosh, they really are good. They really do deliver. It is something I've never would have tried before. And now I'm glad I did. And I think one of the things that we're saying to students is like, no, what we actually care about is we care about you doing the thing that God has called you to, and we care about you being the kind of person that has developed the intellectual tools where you are able to navigate a complex world where things are changing all the time. And we're hoping to deliver the kind of training for you that enables you when those moments happen, when you don't know what to do, you think, okay, I'm a little confused right now, but I know I have the tools that will enable me to investigate the situation and then act accordingly. Right. So we want to remove some of the dauntingness around that and say, no, 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 you can get to the place where even when you're sort of lost in the intellectual wilderness, you will find your way out.
Well, I will say that I wish we had more time to talk because I find this to be a very interesting discussion. I feel like I need to do more reading. um, I have like a running list now. Um, but I just wanted to thank you both again for your time today. Like I said, this has been very interesting, and I think it will be for a lot of different people. Um, maybe you can make like an adult course. So those of us that are not in school anymore, we're interested. Um, uh, but yeah, so just yeah, thank you for your time, and I really
Absolutely.
appreciate the work that you're doing, and
Thank
I
you.
think it's having a really good impact that clearly you can see it, but that's really awesome.
Thanks. It
Thanks.
was
Thanks
good
for
to meet
spending
you.
time. Thanks for asking us to do this.
Yeah. Yeah.